Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Today we're going to take a look at Deus from Asmodee and Pearl Games, I believe. Yes. Now this is a civilization building game where technically you're trying to build up a sort of generic Roman civilization and perhaps invoke the power of the gods in order to do so. But really, while you're laying out map tiles and having to take over territory and place buildings and things, it's more of just a Euro resource management game. You're trying to play cards, put down buildings, make more and more resources, more money, and sort of build card combos. So it's an odd mixture of things. You have hand management and resource management and some area control as well, all sort of thrown into the pot and turned into a game that's kind of a Civ game and kind of not. Let's go ahead and take a brief look at how the game is played, then we're going to come back and let you know what I think.
Alright, I'm just going to give you a brief run through of Deus. This is a competitive game for 2 to 4 players. The goal is to have the most victory points by the end of the game. Thematically speaking, you are trying to sort of build a small empire and invoke the power of the gods in order to help you do so. You're going to be using different colored cards representing either maritime and production and science and merchants and your armies, in order to build all these different types of buildings out onto this these tiles. Now, there's going to be a random amount of tiles depending, well, not random, but there'll be a certain amount of tiles depending on the number of players, and you can kind of set them up however you want, except that these barbarian villages where I have victory point tokens can never be adjacent to each other. Every player is going to have a player board, and you're going to start with 2 buildings of every type on the board. So just to show you what those are, you have the ships, you've got the production buildings, the, I guess these are universities or academies for science. I'm not really sure what they're called, actually. These merchant houses or mercantile houses, and then these little army dudes with backpacks. Or actually, no, they're supposed to be shields, I suppose. You're also going to have some starting victory points, money, and resources. There are 4 types of resources. There's wood, wheat, stone, and clay. And then you'll have a stock of other buildings. Now, those buildings are not eligible for you to build out onto the tiles yet. You'll have to do some special abilities of the gods in order to grab those buildings, put them, or grab those buildings, put them onto your actual player board. Then you may be able to build them out onto the tiles. And then finally, the other thing I'll note as far as components, well, aside from the cards, is that you have these temples. Now, you're going to have a number of temples in play, again, depending on the number of players. The game is going to end in one of 2 ways. Either when the last temple is placed out onto the board, at which point each player is going to have one more turn. Essentially, you'll have one more round to play. The end result being that every player has the same amount of turns. Or if all of the barbarian villages are attacked. Now, when a barbarian village is attacked, all the victory points are removed from it, and I'll explain that in a moment. If that happens to every single barbarian village, then the same condition, everyone's going to have one more turn, one more final rounds. Everyone has the same amount of turns, then the game ends and you add up all of your points. Now, Deus is very simple in the regard that you've only got 2 types of actions you can take on your turn, and you get 1 action. Everyone's going to take 1 action and you keep going around and around. So the first type of action that you can take is simply to build one of the cards in your hand. The other type of action is called giving an offering to the gods, which mechanically represents you discarding cards in order to get more cards and potential special abilities. In fact, that's the only way that you replenish your hand. Even if you don't invoke the power of a god, giving an offering to a god is the only way that you're going to draw back up to your normal hand limit of 5. I'll get to all of that. But first, building a card. Building a card is as simple as taking one of the cards from your hand, spending the appropriate resources, and putting it in the appropriate slot, color-coded and building-coded. So these blue cards with the ship are always going to go into the column above your player board in the blue spot. I don't have a lot of room here, so we'll just have to move those out a bit. So you'd build up and up, and since there's a total of 5 potential buildings, remember you don't start with all of them eligible to be built, then you have a limit of 5 cards that you can possibly build. Now, every time that you build, and I'll just to show you an example here, the breakdown of one of the cards. These are the resources you need up top. So this galley card needs a wood and a wheat resource. So just discard 2 of those. You have to have them in your stock, and then you'll place the down in front of you. Now, the first thing you do as soon as you build that is you have to make sure that you actually have an eligible place for the building. These are all collectively called buildings, which in this case is a ship, to go. Now, the blue ones, the ships, they have to go, well, they're all blue in this case, but I mean the particular maritime ship buildings, those have to go in the sea, obviously. Now, at the start of the game, you have to come in from the edge of the board if you haven't already built a building. From then on, you must always build off of other buildings that you already have in play. Even if it's an army, that's still considered a building. You have to build off of that. If for whatever reason you can't do that, you can come in at another edge of the board, but you lose victory points for having done so as like a penalty. Now, the other thing that happens is that when you play a card, you immediately resolve the action that is printed on the card. And when you build more of the same color of card, you will continually build on top, and then after you get done building the card, making sure that you can do it and discarding the resources, you resolve not just the last action that you played, but every action underneath it. So you have like a cascading effect. So it'll be the same thing for each of these. Like if it's a production building or a science, I would do the same thing. I would place the building out, and the rest of these buildings can go on any of the land areas. But again, you just have to follow the rules for placement, and then you'll resolve all the effects. So just to give you some examples of what they are. So this is the merchant house, and this, well, let me focus a bit. So, this is the Brickmakers Guild. The Brickmakers Guild says you gain a victory point per swamp that you occupy. Swamps being the sort of clay-colored areas on the board. So when you build this card, you'll immediately do that effect, or if it's already been built and you're building another card on top of it, you'll resolve the effect as well in order from top to bottom. So in that case, you would get victory points. Victory points in this game are hidden, by the way. Let's see. Let's take a look at the one that I just built here. This is the galley. You can buy up to 3 resources of your choice for 1 gold each. Now, normally, you can trade in a resource. Instead of a resource, let's say I don't have wheat, I can spend 4 gold, 4 coins, in order to replace that resource with money, but not vice versa. So it's actually way, way, way more efficient to just spend a coin for resources that you might need. Other examples, I'll show you one of the sciences. This is one of the science buildings. These usually have an effect that works off of other cards or other buildings that you have. It's sort of generic in that regard, but it usually gives you some pretty decent effects. Like this one says gain 2 buildings per region with at least 3 buildings of your color. That means when it says gain 2 buildings, you actually take those buildings from your stock and put them onto your board. So it's very useful if you need to get buildings in a hurry. Let's look at a production building. This is the farm. Choose a field, which is one of the yellow areas on the board, that has one of your production buildings. You earn 1 wheat for each building, not just production buildings, in this field, so long as it has a production building on it. Then let's look at one of the military cards. The military cards being just a little bit different than all of the other ones because you're actually going to be moving your troops around or using them to take stuff from your opponents. This one, the Legion says choose one of your armies and steal 1 victory point from each opponent occupying at least 1 region adjacent to this army. There's also other army cards that are actually going to let you move your troops around. So let's say that I had already put one of my guys out here on the board. One of the cards lets you actually move through barbarian territory and potentially move through enemy territory as well, and then you can end in a different spot. And this way you can actually use this in order to keep spreading around the map, because otherwise an opponent might be able to block you off by putting their units down. You can't build through or on someone else's stuff. Also, whenever you're building buildings out onto the board, you can have multiple buildings of your type in the same spot. And in fact, many cards require you to do so in order to get better benefits, but you can't have the same building built twice in the same spot. Now, the last type of building card I'll describe are I think I hit all the other ones. Did I? Yeah, I did. So these are the purple ones. These are the temples. Temples are only for endgame scoring. They always give you a maximum of 12 points each if you meet the conditions listed on the card, and they always take one of each resource in order to build. So this one says at the end of the game, you gain 4 victory points per region with at least 4 buildings of your color, again to a max of 12. They're all going to be to a max of 12, but a lot of them have very varied conditions. Some of them are for every swamp that you occupy at the end of the game, you get 4 victory points, and so on to a max of 12. Now, you build your temples down in this section of your player board, and the first one can be built at any time. There's no preset condition other than having the resources and having the card in hand. But from then on, you have to have a set of cards for each temple you want to build beyond the first. So once you build the first one, the next temple, you have to have one of every other kind of production card built. Then you can build one. Then for the third one, you have to have 2 sets of every single card, and so on. And remember, those are victory points at the end of the game. You don't just take them from the stock right away. And then when you put the temples out onto the board, it's the same rules as putting anything else. It just goes into one of your land areas. You can even go where you only have a troop, but then that troop cannot abandon the area. So the last thing I'll talk about during this, that would happen during the building phase, is what happens with these barbarian armies. Now, it's possible to attack a barbarian army. There's not really attacking in this game per se. But let's say that this area becomes surrounded. This is just an example, and remember that you got a picture. I just didn't want to go through all the hassle, but you got a picture that there's more enemy units and stuff out on the board, and that you can't cohabitate on the same spot, but you could be moving in and out of each other, blocking each other off, and so on. So let's say that this was how the board was. Now, if it was just like this, where there's all of just your normal buildings and none of your armies are there, then nothing happens. Okay, you've surrounded the barbarian camp, but you've only done it with buildings, so it doesn't. They're all buildings, but you've only done it with sort of mundane buildings, and nothing happens. But if even one army, one military unit, is out there amongst all the buildings, and that barbarian camp is completely surrounded by buildings, then the barbarian camp is attacked and essentially destroyed. And whoever has the most armies units amongst all of those buildings gets to take all the victory points. If there's a tie, then it's whichever player has the most total buildings built in that area. And it's possible for more than one player to be involved, or more than 2 players, I should say, to be involved in this conflict. But you just take all the victory points. Now, even then, this area is still like a dead area. You can't really do anything with it. And the last thing I'll describe is what the second action is that you can take on your turn. And that is actually invoking the power of the gods. Now, at the bottom of your player board, you have a little cheat sheet as to what all of these powers do. So what happens is, instead of building on your turn, you just decide, okay, I'm going to give an offering to the gods. And now, if you have a hand limit of 5 in this game. If you don't wish to discard anything, if you were at 5 cards, you'd probably want to discard anything. But let's say you start your turn and you've got 2 cards in hand. And you want to hold on to those, but you just want more cards. Well, in that case, you can just draw back up to 5, and that's your quote-unquote offering to the gods. But more than likely, what you're going to want to do is discard at least 1 card and get one of the special abilities associated with the 6 gods that are in the game. And how it works is that the cards that you discard, whatever card that you put on top in the discard pile, that color-coded is going to go to one of the gods, and you'll invoke that particular god as long as it's the one that's on top. If you have multiple choices to choose from, well, more power to you. You just decide which one you want to invoke at that particular time. And they all have a different effect. So, for instance, if you discard one of the maritime buildings, for most of these, you're going to actually get a building of its appropriate type taken from your stock and put onto your board. So if you discard it's Neptune, I believe. I'm not going to get all these names right, trust me. But then you get to take one of your ships and put it onto the board. And also, for every card that you discard, you can discard as many as you want, to an upper limit of 10, I believe, is the most you can have in hand at a time. But you can discard as many cards as you want, and you get 2 coins from the stock for every card that you discard. Remember that coins are useful for trading in for a resource only when you're doing construction. And also at the end of the game, there are victory points for having the majority of each resource, including money. You get 2 extra victory points, so that's something to keep in mind. Then you have the production god, whose name escapes me. But how this works is You just you have to discard one of the green cards on top. You get to take one of the production buildings and put it on your board, and then you get a resource of your choice for every single card that you discard. This one, I'm pretty sure, is Minerva, and because I used her a lot, which sounded bad. But you get to take one of your science buildings and put it on your board, and for every card that you discard, at the end of your turn, after you draw back up to 5, you'll draw an additional card for every card that you discard. So let's say that you had 5 cards in hand at the start of your turn, and you discard 3 of those cards. At the end of your turn, you'll draw back up to 5, and then you'll draw another 3 cards. So you'll have a total of 8 cards at the end of it. This is Merchant God. And Merchant God gives you one of the merchant houses, and if you discard at least 1 card, you get 1 victory point. If you discard 2 or more cards, you are going to get 2 victory points, but only 2. You don't get like a continually stacking amount of victory points. This one is Mars, and what Mars does is for every card that you discard, you get a building of your choice from your stock onto your player board. Doesn't have to be a military unit, even though he's associated with military units. You just get whatever you want. And then lastly, you have Jupiter, who you must discard one of the temples in order to do, because he's the purple god. And when you do that, it's like a wild. You can invoke any other god that you want. So if you really want to invoke the production goddess or god, and you don't have a green card to discard, but you do have a temple to discard, you can do that. You can take that effect if you want. You get all the appropriate stuff, including getting the building of the appropriate type. Then at the end of your turn, you draw back up to 5 or more if you did Minerva, and then play continues. That is your whole action. It goes to the next player where you can build or you can discard and so on. The end result being that you want to get a fat stack of victory points or potentially build temples in order to have the most points by the end of the game. That is a quick and dirty run through of Deus. Let's get to my final thoughts.
Okay, that's Deus. And theme and components. The theme is very, very, very light in this one. I do like the idea of making an offering to the gods and invoking each of these different gods, and they're all themes to a specific type of thing. Like Neptune has to do with the sea and so on, and Ares has, see, look, I'm mixing the pantheons, but Mars has to do with building troops, although he actually builds any kind of building. So that's the thing. There's the little bit of theme there, but then there's weird unthematic stuff, and the land that you're supposed to be conquering is just very generic. They won't even refer to it by a name in the book. So the theme is kind of not there. But component-wise, the game looks kind of cool, actually. I like all the little wooden miniatures. I like the artwork on the cards. Again, it's kind of generic, but it looks good. The graphic design is very good and well laid out. We never had any kind of confusion over what something did, other than the powers of the gods. It almost would have been good just to have everyone have one little card detailing what each thing did, because the first couple of games, or I should say that the first couple of rounds of play, it was very difficult for everyone to remember what everything did. And I've had to play this game with 3 different groups of players, so I had to go through that every time. It seems very intuitive, especially they have the icons on the board, but that doesn't always make the most sense to people that are new to the game. So that would have been a welcome benefit. But everything else, the meeples, the tokens, the tiles are a bit odd, but they're functional for what they are. So everything looks pretty good. I'm very satisfied with the components. The mechanics of the game. This, like I was having kind of trouble in the intro describing what this game is. It's definitely a card-driven Euro game, but it is a little bit of civilization and area control. You have to make buildings, and then those buildings will produce resources for you, and you're taking over swaths of land, and once you have control of those, other players can't take them from you. You're sort of, you can even cut people off. So there's little bits and pieces of a lot of different tropes of modern designer board games. The area control, the hand-driven or the card-driven the card-driven mechanics, and just how they all interact with one another. These are things that we've seen in a lot of other games, and they're just sort of thrown into this mix here and produce a very interesting result. I think what I like the most is that card-driven part, and specifically building up combos. So the way that it works, as you saw in the overview, was that you can activate every single card in a row of cards up to 5, because that's essentially the building limit, because you run out of buildings at that point. But every time that you build one of those buildings, you activate every single card down in the row. The first time you play this game, if you're anything like me and the rest of my group, you will have a very difficult time making that work for you, because you're just like, well, if a turn where I don't build anything is a waste of turn, so I'm just going to build this, and who cares, no forward planning. But the game really does reward forward planning. You want to make those combos. You want to get a chain of things where it's like, just as an example, like, okay, here's a science building. This science building gives me victory points for every green building that I have, the production building. So I want to try to have as many production buildings as possible and try to get this science building into play as quickly as I can, and then keep building more science buildings and more production buildings, and just getting this cascade of victory points. That's the best thing I can do. Or for instance, with the maritime cards, the blue ones, you're going to want to try, they're all about selling things, right? So you want to have that working in conjunction with your production sources, like make a ton of clay and then sell it for a ton of money, or sell lots of stone and wheat in order to get victory points. These are all different things you can do. And so it's not just the cards within a row of, or a column of cards on one particular type of building that work off of each other and that you want to put down in the right way, but they're going to be impacted by the other columns of cards that you've already built. And I find that fascinating. I think it's really, really interesting. And when I first tried to wrap my head around it, I'm like, I'm just something I'm not getting here, and it takes time. It takes time to sort of realize how you should be building this engine. It is like an engine building game, although it's a very erratic one, because eventually you're not going to be able to do anything with those columns. If you, as you get later into the game, unless you've been really diversifying, you're going to hit a wall for each of those, because you can only build 5. And once you do that, unless you have other cards that say you get to activate, like, there's a science building that says you can activate a green card. That's going to be the only time you'll be able to activate something else, because you've already built as far as you're going to go, which is a very limiting thing, but it also makes the game much more interesting. And hand in hand with that is the idea of the offerings of the gods, which I alluded to before, which the first time you play, again, I'm only going off my own experience, but I would imagine that other people have had this thought too, because it seems very innovative to me. The idea that it felt wrong to not build something and say, this is crap, I'm just going to dump my entire hand, because it seems very inefficient. And the first time that I played the game, I have a feeling I was building things I shouldn't have been building, and that I should have been invoking the gods much more often than I was, in better ways. Because that is the whole crux of the game, deciding when to do that, when to dump your entire hand, when to get the most benefit out of it, because that's the number one way you're going to get buildings, and the number one way you're going to get more cards and more options, and trying to get those temples as fast as you can, deciding how to dump your hand, which god to invoke, and what you should hold on to and what you shouldn't, what's going to be dead weight in your hand and what's not, and whether or not it's a wasted turn for you to just invoke the gods without actually, or just to dump your hand, or not dump your hand, just to draw back up to 5 without invoking the gods, which seems like a waste. And it is inefficient at times, but sometimes it's not a terrible idea. Making these decisions is key to winning the game, and I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. Other things, that's sort of the card-driven part. The area control part is a bit of a weirder beast, because, and this is where I think it'll trick people up, it is area control, and it is a little bit of civic building. You're putting all these buildings out and trying to take control of large swaths of area. I don't think that everyone in my group was quite prepared for how kind of cutthroat it can be, cutting someone off and cutting off their supply lines and keeping them from spreading out. And also trying to horn in on someone's territory when they're trying to take those barbarian villages can get kind of tense. You're like struggling to control these things, because that's a sweet pile of points right there. You really want that. But it's sort of, sometimes it's a game of chicken. Like, I've got this area surrounded, but there's like maybe 2 spaces left. Now, if I put something here, he can just swoop in with his military unit by playing one of those military cards that lets you move his guys, and possibly just finish that off. He'll have more military units than I will, and then he's going to get these points. But when do we do that? And I know that there was a particular instance in one of the games that I played where I was pretty much guaranteed to gain the barbarian points if the circle was complete. The circle is complete, because I had a ton of buildings around like one semicircle of this barbarian village, and I had like 2 or 3 armies that just happened to be camped out there. But I could not build the last remaining spot. The last remaining spot was like a C area, and it was like around, like the enemy had cut me off from building that way at all. So I would have had to, I'm not even sure that it was possible at all for me to do that, or without a bunch of different cards just coming up into my hand at that certain point. And nobody else was going to do that. They could have spent the resources to move more army units into their spaces. There was like 2 other people there that were vying for control of that section of the map. But no one was going to. No one blinked first because they didn't want to give me points. So the area control is very interesting in that regard. Also, and I think people who were expecting more of an in-your-face Civ thing, while it is cutthroat cutting people off that way, there's no combat per se. Sometimes you can steal coins and victory points from people depending on the military cards you have, but there's no wiping people out. There's no taking over their stuff and putting out your buildings. It's not like that. It's just getting your stuff to the map first and then sort of angrily coexisting. That's how the area control works, and I'm not sure that it's all that successful. It's interesting, but I think that it's a bit odd, especially when it's paired with the hand and card management aspect. Now, the part of the game that I think is the most contentious for me, the thing that I'm the most iffy on, is the climax of the game. And the game ends when either all of the temples have been placed on the board. You can still keep building temples in the final go-around, but there's no more to actually put out there, or when all the barbarian villages have been sacked. My experience has been that it is much more likely that the temples are going to go first. In fact, that's how all of our games ended, except one game where both things happened within like the same turn. And the problem with that, I kind of feel that throughout the course of the game, I wish there were other ways to get just tons and tons of points. And there are definitely ways. You can combo those blue cards together pretty strongly, and even some of the science cards, in order to get a bunch of points. You can get a pile of points that way, but really nothing compared to the temples. And the temples, first off, it's very dependent on you being able to have them, being able to use them at the right time. If you build them too soon, they're just kind of dead weight sitting there. You had to spend your resources on that when maybe you should have been building up your engine in one of the other spots. But if you wait too long, someone might build all the remaining temples and then you're just kind of stuck. Especially if you really need those temples to actually represent buildings on the map. So you can keep building temples as much as you want, but then the actual building parts are going to be gone, and that might suck for you if you have a limitation on, or you have a temple that requires you to have a certain number of buildings and a certain number of spaces. And that's the other thing, is that some of the temples are, they're all very dependent on you meeting certain conditions, whether it's occupying certain spaces of land, having certain sets of cards, or whatever it might be. And sometimes it's just, the luck's just not with you. You haven't set your map up that way. You've been working towards getting this one temple, which might require you to have 4 different spots of with 4 buildings in each, or 5 buildings in each. But then you get another temple that just says you need to have a ton of clay or stone, but you haven't been working on that at all. But that's the temple that you have, and now the game is about to end. So it's very, very luck dependent on whether or not you get the temples that are going to be best for you. And also, I'll say that it's luck dependent on any of the card draws, because sometimes you just get crap. Even after you dump your entire hand, even after you invoke, what is it, Minerva, who lets you get extra cards for dumping cards, and you fill your hand all the way up to 10, the limit, you still might not get what you need. I played at least one game in this where I didn't get a single military unit. I mean, I probably got a couple of military units, but not when I needed them, not to the end of the game, and it was really, really rough. So there's a significant amount of luck here that I think Eurogamers should probably be warned about. It's a surprising amount of luck. Now, it probably sounds like I'm being really harsh to the game, and I don't really mean to be. I like it a lot. It's staying in my collection for now, because I don't have a lot of, well, I wouldn't call it a hardcore Euro game, but it definitely is a Euro game. I don't have a lot of games like this. But I would just caution you that there is more randomness than you would suspect. Some of the things are weird. It's kind of anticlimactic. I don't like how the game ends and you could just be stuck and not really have any recourse, because the temples are a massive amount of points and you just might not have been able to get them. And I also just think it's very, very mechanical. It's very dry. It's just build card, build card, build card. set off chain reaction, get points, get tokens, trade this resource for this, trade this for this, trade this for this. It's very, very mechanical, and while there's a lot of things I like about that, the brain-burning aspect of it, and just seeing a plan come together, it's not thematic at all, and I know that there's going to be some disconnect for some gamers because of that, but overall, it's still a solid game. That is Deus.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.